Continue meditating. We'll do this equanimity meditation. So you start by either visualizing or bringing to mind a stranger. So you can actually imagine like someone, who you passed in another vehicle on the way here, or someone who works in a shop, a restaurant, someone who's just a neighbor who you don't really know, so just a stranger. So try to bring to mind, someone you saw recently who you don't know. And imagining them, either thinking of them or imagining them in front of you. The first step is you notice your actual feeling when you think of that person. So we have to turn inward and introspect. And without trying to change our feeling at this point, we're just noticing it. What one actually notices, right, is indifference. Oftentimes with a stranger one can almost feel, if you're honest, right, you look at your actual inner experience when you think of them, that it's almost like they don't exist. They're just part of the background of my life. I don't feel attachment to them. I don't hate them. I'm just indifferent to them. And that's sort of the normal self-centered way of viewing strangers. So still keeping that person in mind, right? Or visualizing them in front of us. We contemplate a bit. Exactly the same as me, that person wants happiness. Exactly the same as me, that person doesn't want to suffer. Ordinarily, I'm completely oblivious to that. Actually, it doesn't cross my mind. It's not that I couldn't understand it, but it doesn't cross my mind, right? Because I'm indifferent to the person. Just like me, this person has struggles in their life, trying to attain their happiness, but often not finding it very easy. Often this person comes across difficult circumstances, for certain. Right? We know that logically. We don't think of it usually. So now we're trying to put ourselves, right, this stranger, we're sort of imaginally putting ourselves just a bit in their shoes. Also, we kind of see, right, that this person's only a stranger from my perspective. Right? That just like me, they have people who love and care for them, people who dislike them, That it's just a projection of my mind, right? That they're a stranger, or that they're an indifferent, somebody to be indifferent towards. It actually has nothing to do with them at all. If that same person, like, just did 3 or 4 kind things for me, right? Then I suddenly might start thinking of them as a friend. If that person just did 1 or 2 negative things, right, things that I didn't like, then I might start thinking of them as an enemy. It's actually 100% clear they're not a stranger or an indifferent person, right, somebody of no value from their own side. So through this contemplation, the idea is that you start challenging your own projection. Right? Noticing how many people as you walk around in your life, right, you just sort of feel indifferent towards. And then realizing, right, if I want to live a life of compassion, if I want to live a spiritual life, then, that attitude, right, that I ordinarily have towards most people I see or hear about is completely an obstacle to living a good life. A life of love, a life of compassion, a spiritual life. It's also unrealistic. Or is not seeing the reality of other people, right? Not seeing that they're the same as me, and that I'm the same as them. That we're all not experiencing us as all equal. So next, bring to mind the second person. A person towards whom you ordinarily feel strong attachment or grasping, thinking this is my family member, my friend. Right? Where you can actually feel that sense of my. Right? So if you just think of their face, you feel this is, my friend. This is, my brother or sister, husband or wife, child or parent. And really notice that sense of my. That feeling of like attachment, also like grasping and identification with them. Notice how different that feeling is, right, from the feeling that arose when you thought of the stranger's face and body. And now with this person, there's a totally different projection. So first we can notice again, right, that this projection is totally from our own mind. There's nothing inherent to that person that makes them mine. Lots of other people look at them and feel the kind of indifference I felt towards the first person. Other people look at them and strongly dislike them. It's just my own mental projection onto them. And where does that projection come from? And so you analyze your own experience, right? And if you check, you'll see it comes from, some incidents in the past. some conditions of, they did something for you, right? It's actually kind of a self-centered feeling. Right? This person benefits me or makes me feel safer, it makes me feel more important. And so, I don't care about most people, but I care about them. It's a completely conditional sort of attitude. And you can check it, actually, because if you imagine that person then doing a bunch of things you don't like, right, then you can, if you're honest with yourself, you see, right, it would definitely lead to a whole bunch of mental agitation, upset, even anger. Right? If that person suddenly starts doing things I don't like, for sure, I'll be miserable, right, and then I'll also make them unhappy. Because they're mine, right? Or they're my person, or they're my friend, or my this, my that. And then if we're honest with ourselves, right, we project all kinds of expectations onto that person. So that kind of grasping and feeling of my is not actually what Buddhism is talking about in terms of love, right? That's grasping, actually. And so again, we're kind of challenging our ordinary perceptions, our ordinary projections onto people. So I label somebody stranger, and I don't care about them. I ignore their subjective reality, right, of wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer, having struggles. Then the person who I label, friend or loved one. Again, I believe in my own label, right? Then I put all kinds of expectations on them. If they disappoint too many of my expectations, right, then actually that's how friends become enemies, right, or even loved ones, right, stop talking to each other, and hurt each other's feelings, right, or harm each other. It's because of these unrealistic, exaggerated expectations. Right? When I feel, also the friend, right, I actually don't see them objectively. I exaggerate the qualities I like about them and ignore or don't see accurately the qualities, their flaws. Right? So I can't see them accurately, and therefore I'm not that good at helping them. I distort through my projections. If you check with this second step of the meditation, right? Like if you say to yourself, wow, so I'm exaggerating, it doesn't help me, it doesn't help the other person. It'd be good if I let go of that projection of minus. of grasping. If you're honest with yourself, for sure there will be part of your mind that doesn't want to let go of that, that says, no, they are mine. I don't want to let go of that. I want to think of them that way. That makes me happy. So in this meditation, you notice that. Right? You're just asking yourself, well, does that make you happy? Right? Does that make the other person happy? Is that a realistic and helpful way of viewing that person? Sometimes Tibetan teachers, one metaphor that's used for this is, the metaphor of that rain or water is like loving kindness. So if you have a lake, or an ocean, right, then it can hold a lot of that. But if our attitude is kind of like projecting, and it's like a rocky hill, even if some loving feelings do arise, a mind that's rocky like that can't hold that love. So love with this kind of projection doesn't last, isn't stable. There may be moments of genuine love, but they get lost because of our projections and expectations on others. And we confuse love with projecting, with expecting, with wanting, with attachment and anger and indifference. So we're just challenging our own assumptions a bit. So while we're doing that, let's move on to the third step, where you bring to mind an enemy, right? Somebody who, whether you know them in your personal life, like somebody at work or in your neighborhood, or somebody from your personal life, or it could be somebody from who you see in the news, right? But somebody who, when you just thinking of their form, of their name, right, brings to mind a feeling of aversion or anger, right? Of like disgust. So again, it could be somebody you work with, somebody who's hurt you in the past in your personal life, or it can be somebody who's like political or social views, right, makes you immediately feel a strong aversion or disgust with them. And again, you notice your own feeling. That just seeing them, you wish like you didn't have to see them. Just bring them to mind, you wish they would go away. It's like a strong feeling of aversion, or of disgust, or of anger. Those are all in the same class of feelings. And so really take a moment to notice how different that feeling is. Right? All this is going on in your mind, right? You're just imagining or thinking of them. Right? But that feeling is so different from the feeling towards the stranger, or towards the person you grasp at. Right? Completely opposite of the grasping person, the person you grasp at. And so if you be honest and look at that feeling, and then we begin to, again, just like before, analyze, right? So for sure there's no way, right? I don't think, if I first bring that person to mind, I don't see how they want to be happy and don't want to suffer exactly like me. That we're totally the same. For sure that's not what comes to mind when I bring them to mind. For sure I don't see their struggles. You know, how much they want to be happy and all the problems that come up in their life. I ordinarily have no room for empathy or compassion for them. Not from the heart anyway, right? I don't see, right, clearly how other people cherish and love them, right? That there's nothing from their side that makes them an enemy. It's just some temporary conditions, right? Some words they said, or a few actions they did. And in this world, right, for sure, enemies become fast friends. Best friends become enemies, right? It happens all the time. Yet when I look at them, it seems to me like they're concretely from their own side, the enemy, the bad person, somebody annoying or negative. But it's a complete projection of my mind. Because of circumstances, my mind fabricates or creates that kind of idea and image and feelings about them. But there's nothing intrinsic to that person that corresponds to that projection. It's just created by the mind, by my mind. And if I analyze honestly, for sure that projection brings me suffering. Whereas as soon as I brought them to mind, I felt a sense of agitation, right? Of uneasiness. And then to the extent that they're influenced by me, it brings them suffering too. And I believe in that projection so concretely, even though it could change in a moment. It does all the time in the world. Also, it's like unrealistic, right? I'm not seeing them for who they are. I'm seeing them through the lens of that they don't agree with my ego in some way. I wanted them to do this, but they did that. I wish they would say X, but they say Y. So it's kind of like a childish, actually, way of viewing others. So now imagining myself and all three of those people, the person I labeled stranger, who I labeled my friend, and who I labeled my enemy, and then myself. So thinking of all four of us, and now contemplate, right? Each of the four of us is completely the same, totally equal in wanting to be happy. And of that there's no doubt. Each of the four of us is completely equal in not wanting to suffer. Again, it's totally clear. Right? There's no way that that's not true. We're all equal in being impermanent, fleeting creatures, right? Creatures whose lives are fleeting on this planet, right? Who are fragile, don't last for long. We're all equal in meeting with all kinds of difficult circumstances, in having our own challenges and sufferings. And we're all equal in that we're going to die someday. We don't know when. And through such contemplations, we're just like experimenting right now with seeing what it feels like to have a different kind of mental attitude. One of equanimity or even-mindedness. A kind of mature attitude that recognizes that, yes, circumstances change, of course. Yes, relationships, conventionally change. But fundamentally, we're all equal as creatures. We're all equally worthy, right, of respect, of care, of kindness, of love, and of compassion. In those fundamental ways, there's no difference. And so you're just experimenting with your own mind, right? So like if you say, okay, so the enemy and the person, my most cherished, loved person, right, are totally equal in deserving love. So you're experimenting with like asserting that feeling to yourself and then seeing if there's a part of you that pulls away from that and says no. And again, you're not trying to be mean to yourself, but you're just noticing your own reactions, right, and working with them, right? And asking yourself, so is that helpful to me? In the long run, does it help me to hate my enemies, and cherish my friends, and not care about most other creatures around me? We're experimenting with asking ourselves, how would it feel, right, if I lived with an even mind, with a realistic mind that saw how everybody is fundamentally equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering and having difficulties in our impermanence and mortality. One last step before we stop this is to imagine to ourselves, how would it be actually if I walked around life? And if everyone I met, right, or even those I didn't meet who I just passed by, if deep in my heart my recognition was that they're all equal to each other, equal to my dearest loved one, and equal to myself, in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and being impermanent. How would it be if I didn't project indifference or stranger onto some people, enemy or negative person onto others? A sense of ownership or identification with myself onto others. How would it be if I relaxed all those projections? What would it be like to walk around and meet people? To have relationships with people without those expectations and mental fabrications about them? Okay, so let's come out of the meditative mode into more interactive. So I just want to ask, anybody have comments or questions about that equanimity? There are two types of equanimity meditations. That's the first one or something, the most preliminary one. Yeah.
I have a difficult time not having an opinion with certain people that have done atrocities. Like you were saying last part, think of somebody that you really dislike. And I thought, he's in history, Hitler. I mean, I can understand that he's a human being and he doesn't want suffering and he's just like us. But how do I take away that opinion that he's done these atrocities? And how does that help me? And because I understand his humanness.
Right. Yeah, the idea here would be, it's a common question, right? It's a common challenge for this practice. When you think of anybody who's done really terrible things, right? But there are a few different contemplations on that, or many actually. But I'll go through a few. Like, I'll show you which one to start with. So actually, in a certain way, actually,
Are you just saying
Hitler's
we're not
interesting.
supposed to have it's not good to have an opinion?
No, I'll differentiate that. It's not. First of all, it is an important point actually. With any of those, right? Like, in other words, it is important to be able to have. It's normal and healthy to be able to notice differences, right? So, like, whereas if somebody, if you took, actually, I'll say this too. So, I'll start with actually a more preliminary point. If you took that meditation, right, and you thought, okay, so everybody's equal, and then like you're at the gas station and you walked up to the gas station attendant and started hugging them, right? I mean, you would only frighten them, right? It would be a little weird, And if you said, and then if you said somebody like somebody who was about to do a terrible or had just done a terrible act, and you said, "Oh, that's wonderful. That's so nice that they did that," right? That would just be psychotic, in other words, it wouldn't be useful. So the goal is not that. In other words, the goal is like in a conventional level, one recognizes what people are doing and how they're behaving. But the idea, in a way, is this. It's actually maybe a good way to get at that is this. There are many ways to get it, but I'll start with this one. I think of actually one way to start with it is actually if you think of this is actually the attitude that there's a Buddhist meditation, but it's the same attitude that, for example, that Gandhi took when dealing with the British in India, or that Martin Luther King Jr. Encouraged everybody, his colleagues and himself, to take when dealing with some of the civil disobedience, right? So sometimes people, in other words, in both of those cases, the other was doing terrible things at times, right? But both of them, and the Dalai Lama says the same thing, right? It's this idea that if you view the other as purely just evil, right, and then hate them, right? First of all, then there's no hope, right? In other words, there's no hope for a positive change. Now Hitler's a little different because he's dead, so it's not an interaction with him, so we can get to that in a minute, But the idea is that, so even somebody who's doing atrocity, like killing, right? In other words, both of those instances, there were people who killed, right? And it's not to say that those people shouldn't be punished if they murdered somebody, right? That wasn't the stance. But the stance was there's always hope, right, for things to improve. And that to go into it viewing the other as evil and my side as good, right? In a way, it's like the recognition there is that that's the problem everywhere, right? Like, in other words, if I say my side is good and the other side is evil, right? The other person is evil, and they say, well, no, I'm evil and they're good, then there's no hope for change in the world, actually, right? And so it's not to say, oh, if somebody did something bad, I'm going to pretend they didn't or something. It's, of course, recognizing that. But it's this idea that if you can not get caught in those kind of extreme projections about the other, actually, that was why I thought it was it's very much in line with this one. I'm just giving an example of Martin Luther King Jr. when he used to say, even as they're shooting hoses at us or something, or sending dogs at us, like, we have to march with love, right? That was his stance. So it's kind of like that. And it's this idea that that even somebody who's done something terrible, right, if there's hope for the world, then one has to approach them with love, actually, because it's only that can heal what's wrong. Now, from a Buddhist point of view, I'll step back again because it's slightly. I mean, Buddhism would agree with that, but it even takes a broader view in this way. That it's actually disturbing sometimes. I think if you think about this, I'll share this one. I'll share a metaphor that Bob Thurman, Professor Thurman up in New York, who teaches at Columbia, used. He said, imagine you're on a subway car, right, and people are annoying, right, which can happen. He lives in New York, so. And he said you can have a certain attitude. And then he said, but then imagine that you're going to be on that subway car for all eternity with those people, like for literally eternity, right? He said, then your attitude has to change, right? Like, in other words, no matter how annoying they are, like, if you can't figure out a way to be loving with them, you're going to be miserable for all eternity, right? And the metaphor that he's just using, a metaphor there, a New York metaphor, I guess. But the metaphor there is getting at a Buddhist view in a way, which is that because of the view of reincarnation, the idea is that, in a sense, we are interdependent, interrelated with all sentient beings forever, right? And so then the task, in a way, from a Buddhist perspective, becomes like, whereas if you can't see that the other person's evil actions came from causes and conditions, and that over lifetimes, those causes and conditions can change, right? And the only way to make the universe better, then, from a Buddhist perspective, would be to eventually have everybody's causes, or is that our task is to help the causes and conditions change so people won't do that, won't do bad things, right? And that, in a sense, like if we polarize ourselves from others, then we can't engage in a helpful way with creating better causes and better conditions relationally, because everything arises, from a Buddhist perspective, everything arises relationally, right? Through all kinds of complicated, almost infinitely complicated causes and conditions. And so the Buddhist view is over lifetimes, if we can create an attitude of, first of equanimity and then of compassion, that's in the Buddhist ideal is the Bodhisattva, right? Somebody who, like the Dalai Lama, who goes from life to life trying to help others. And the idea there, right, is that over lifetimes, that one's task, in a sense, is to create different causes and different conditions so that different experiences will arise. And actually, even in a sense, it's like, again, I'm now using Western language a bit, but it's almost like that our task is, if you view it over many lifetimes, that our task is to even, that the people who do the worst things are actually the most disturbed and the most miserable, and are creating the causes of more misery. And so then a bodhisattva's task, in a sense, is to educate them, too, like over lifetimes, in a sense. And it's okay if I go on one more step with this. I'll just give one more example, like, because I think it's an important point. Like, I'm often struck by this with, I'll say this too. So I'm often struck in this example, like, because oftentimes I'm always struck by this, like how some cultures, right, we view, like I'm talking now on an international level, right, like we view another country who we're having a problem with as like inherently bad, right? And it's amazing when you look at it, right? Like that America did that with the British, America did that with the Japanese, like you look at that, and all countries do that, but not all, actually, because I'm struck by the example on this point in Tibetan history of the Tibetan relationship, and the Dalai Lama's particularly over lifetimes relationship with the early on with the Mongolian nation, right? When there was a period where, like, if you look at the actions of Genghis Khan, right, like incredibly killed tens of thousands of people, and there was a point where there was one of the Khans, I forget his name, was doing a genocidal campaign against the Han Chinese, had decided they just didn't like them, so they were going to destroy, like wipe them off the face of the earth, and they were throwing them off cliffs, hundreds of people a day off cliffs, right? And one of the early Dalai Lamas, like, his attitude was, well, I have to educate them, right? So he went and started teaching the Khans of Mongolia and the warriors, right? And then at one point he said to one of them, he said, well, he taught him some stuff, and the Khan really wanted to study more with Dalai Lama. And Dalai Lama said, or early Dalai Lama said, well, I'll only teach you the rest of it if you stop throwing people off cliffs. And he said, okay, I really want to study that, I'll stop, and he stopped throwing people off cliffs and so on. And then later the Dalai Lama took rebirth. One of the Dalai Lamas took rebirth as as I think it was one of those Khan's grandson and son, child, right, and continued educating them. And the point was that then Mongolia, of course, became an extremely peaceful nation, right? So there's this idea of a very long-term perspective in Buddhism in particular. And some people say that, sometimes I thought, well, why do so many lamas come to America? And I thought, oh, they're doing, they look for the most warlike nation on the planet and they say we've got to go help out and pass it, teach them some calm and some sense of equanimity, which we're meditating on. So I think it's also, one has to take a very long-term view also from a Buddhist. The Buddhist perspective is a very long-term view.
So it's really
so it's
how
different.
you react to this person that you think is evil. It's how you react. Because I still have my opinion that I think, what they've done is wrong. And the problem that I have is, putting out those feelings, putting a damper on the feelings that I have towards what they've done.
Yeah, so it's not saying, you don't change those though.
That's okay.
You change your view of the person. You see, there's a difference between being horrified by a particular behavior and then identifying the person with the behavior, right? In this, you can still be horrified by the behavior if you're practicing equanimity. Like, I'm sure that Dalai Lama was horrified by the genocidal campaign, right? It wasn't that he thought, oh, that's no big deal, right? He was horrified. But he didn't identify the person as inherently that behavior, and therefore he was able to engage and stop him from doing genocide. Like, in that instance, you see the difference there? So,
absolutely.
so that's the
It's
difference.
how we react to it, and we have to stop the circle of this madness, whatever, by not doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah, because otherwise we end up in a different way doing the same kind of thing. Exactly. If I think, oh, they're just bad, and I identify them as that.
Feelings against this horrible action is okay in Buddhism.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just differentiate the behavior from that. You don't say therefore they're inherently that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Other comments or questions about equanimity?
The feelings come and go. So sometimes you can't stop them, but on the other hand, let them go.
Yeah.
Or just watch them go.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because you're not fighting it. You're not trying to fight your own feelings in this, right? You're just. But what we are doing is we're trying to change the pattern of them from
Our
one
reaction.
pattern. Yeah, the patterns of our own reactions. By contemplating this way over and over again, we're creating new patterns of reacting. So that then, in a way, because all feelings come and go, right? But what'll happen is if you do this contemplation regularly, then you'll start to notice that a different set of feelings are what are coming and go, right? If you do that enough times, that where maybe at the beginning somebody did something annoying and you just thought, oh, they suck and they're like this and they're like that, that if you do equanimity meditation enough, you can actually see it. Like when the Dalai Lama meets people, right? And he says he has that attitude of he says that, right? He says oh, brothers and sisters, oh, he says wherever I go I consider, and people feel that way with him, right? But it's because he's done this meditation for so many lifetimes, right? That that's what's natural for him, right? He comes across somebody and it doesn't matter what religious background or cultural background they're from, or there's what comes up naturally is this sense of equality and friendship. But I think it must be that that's just what comes up naturally, because if you do that, we've done the other for so long, that what comes up naturally, because I agree with you, everything is always impermanent, but in a way also whatever comes up is just what we're habituated to, right? Whatever feelings arise are just whatever we're familiar with. So if you're familiar with, for example, if you familiarize yourself with anger, then it's really easy to get angry at everybody. Actually, there's if you were to walk around cultivating that, then eventually somebody could just sneeze and you could hate them, or actually it's possible, right? Whereas if you habituate yourself to a more peaceful mind, then what comes up naturally is that. And it's not that you get rid of judgment, but it's that you get rid of those habits of. So those feelings aren't what come up, but it's not through saying. It's not actually what doesn't work is to say, oh, why did I feel that? That's terrible. What works is just to keep cultivating a new habit, and then eventually that habit is just what pervades our experience of other people. So I agree. I think so. It's not that we're trying to change our. Also, in other words, you can't just cut off the feel. If you fight against it in the moment, it just becomes stressful. But it's just developing new habits so that what arises naturally then and spontaneously is different. Yeah.
So how do you dissociate the fact that, some people might have done terrible things, and so you take it from the behavioral point of view, and you disagree with that because you don't like that. At the same time, obviously it takes a Buddha to teach them because, even Shantideva said, be careful who you associate with. So we have to be discriminating in choosing the people that we associate with because they say, if you progress in your path, if you continue your path, you're interested in the path, it's better to keep company with the friends of the Lama that, with some junkie, although you feel, tremendous empathy towards them, but at the same time, I guess that until I'm ready to behave in a certain way, you disapprove their behavior, but at the same time, it's hard to become their friend. If you know that somebody is, smuggling drugs or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. One comment I'll make though about just to relate that to the meditation, because I think this is also an interesting point, but is that equanimity meditation, and also even compassion, right? I think it's I'll just say this the right way. Like, oftentimes, this is just my own opinion. That oftentimes at least in our culture, there's a strong emphasis on externals, right, rather than internal. As we don't talk that much about internal training. We're a very extroverted culture, and so oftentimes, like, our focus in a way becomes very quickly like, so what do I do, right? Which is kind of what you were raising. And I think one thing that's important is that, what Buddhism emphasizes is, I guess it's why the Dalai Lama says, if you want to contribute to world peace, first cultivate inner peace, right? Otherwise, whatever you do, you're going to make things worse in a way. You go out trying to make things better, and you end up making things worse. And the idea here is that there is no implication. Actually, with equanimity, there's not, beyond nonviolence, actually, there's not really an implication of what you do behaviorally, right? So if you cultivate an attitude of equanimity, right, it doesn't necessarily imply that you should do anything, actually. Like in your particular, behaviorally, other than not hurt anybody. So there's no specific, so if you cultivate, less, less of a projection of hatred at friends and less of a projection of attachment, for example, to the people you consider mine, that doesn't necessarily imply you should go spend more time with those people who you labeled enemies, or you should spend less time with the people you labeled. Or it may or may not mean that, but it doesn't necessarily immediately imply a behavioral thing, right? So in other words, that's a different question. What Alessandra's raising is a valid question, but in a way it's a different question. What Buddhism would say is that even-mindedness, because it's realistic and it's healthy and it's peaceful, it's a state of peace, a peaceful mind, that's good no matter what. In other words, that's no matter what else, in other words, no matter what you're doing behaviorally, it's better if you have that kind of mind, right? Because even if they would say, even if you're fighting, you'll fight more realistic. Like Dalai Lama sometimes jokes, he says, even if you're fighting with somebody, if you don't view them as inherently an enemy, you'll be more effective. You'll understand. He sometimes jokes, he'll say, if you just see them as evil, right, then you're just projecting, you don't even see them, right? He said, at least if you have a realistic mind, you'll see them realistically, and maybe you'll be better at the fight, or something. He jokes, he's joking because he teaches nonviolence so much. But the point is that, I've heard the joke though, but the point there is just that it's not a behavioral prescription. In other words, then we have to decide for ourselves, like Alessandra's saying, how do we want to behave? Well, that depends on what's actually a benefit to ourselves and other people. But no matter how we're behaving, having a mind that doesn't exaggerate is beneficial, right? Same thing, right? Even if you're spending a lot of time with your friend, right? As if you're going into it with these expectations, like they're my friend, so they better do this, and why'd they not do that? Then I'm upset with them, and so on, right? We're going to have all kinds of problems. So it's not saying don't stay friends with your friends, but it's saying if you have less projections and less expectations, actually your friend's going to be better off, first of all. Also, you will too, because your mind will be more peaceful. So it's not saying to change your behavior necessarily. There are behavioral suggestions in Buddhism, but this is not one of them. This is a mental training. Does that make sense? Kind of. Yeah, and so also it doesn't. So even if you so it is the same thing. I think Don was joking on that point, but actually, it's not saying don't take a stand against somebody who's doing something wrong either, right? It's just saying don't view them as inherently evil, and don't be unrealistic in your approach to them, and also don't hate them because you'll make yourself and them miserable. Right? That's what it's saying. Really. So then, if you're going to take a stand about something, take it without hatred, without anger.
Is the overarching Buddhist view, like, I mean, of the whole spiritual path in general, to, like, improve the ego enough to a point where, like, you ripen the ego to where you can, like, effectively challenge the foundation of the ego?
It depends what, like, actually, since you're asking from a Buddhist way, like, what do you mean by ego?
The sense of, like, identification with your body and mind. Like the sense of self, that the sense of the false self, I guess, the character you've created in your mind.
So your question is like, so if you say it that way, then is the question like, is the goal of Buddhism to make a false self stronger in order to then undermine a false self? Is that what you're saying?
Well, like, is what's, like, trying to be done is, like, because, I mean, even, like, with, like, the Eightfold Path and everything, like, there's certain actions you're supposed to do and everything, in part, I mean, because it's causes the conditions, and it's calming your mind. You know, if you're running around fighting with everyone and stuff, you can't effectively meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I think that, in my opinion, that's the view. So, like, it's kind of like, it seems like sometimes it's like a never-ending process. Like, is that the idea? Or maybe just the view of the ego or the self that I'm referring to is different than the Buddhist view. Maybe that's what you're getting at. Maybe that's correct.
Because I think the question you're asking is very much a Western question. In other words, you're not unique. In other words, people have written articles and whole books about that topic, but all the people who've written articles and books about that topic are Westerners. Like so I think it's a very Western question in that sense. Like so that's why I'm asking the question. You know, it's a psychological. In other words, it's a question that kind of comes up in the context of Western psychology. So it's a valid question.
I don't mean it in the terms of the Western psychology, what used to be.
Right.
But I know.
But like, because a Buddhist, like, in other words, well, the reason I'm asking, I'll say this, like, so, because like a Buddhist would, like a true, I'll answer it in two different ways. Like, you know, from a Western perspective, actually, I'll say it this way almost, like, from a Western perspective, your question makes sense in a certain way. But from a traditional Buddhist, like, if you ask a Tibetan Lama that question, you'd have to translate the question culturally in a way. Because they would say, actually, what they would say, really, if you look in the teachings, is, well, no, not really. In other words, you're not trying to make. In other words, their answer would be, no, you're not making the ego stronger. You're getting your. But there is a sequence, right? Like for example, in the Eightfold Path,
to, like, make it stronger, like ripening it or something.
Because they would say usually this though, that first you have to change your behavior. Right? If you think of the 3 higher trainings, that first you have to get your behavior under control, which is the training in ethics, right? And that if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to meditate. So their answer would be more like that. Whereas you can't meditate if your behavior is not positive, because your mind will be too agitated and your meditation won't succeed. So what their view would be more like, I mean, the traditional Buddhist view would be that the 3 higher trainings, to some extent, are presented, although you have to train them all at the same time in a way, that their emphasis comes in order, and that the first emphasis has to be on ethics. And morality, and treating others with respect, and not harming others, and not doing negative actions. Because if you're doing, because if you're doing those things, your conscience is so, and then your defenses, then you're all defensive about it, and then you're, that you can't meditate. And if you can't meditate, you're not going to develop wisdom, which undermines the sense of true existence or inherent existence or something. So they would say that first you have to get your behavior under control, however long that takes, right? And like Nagarjuna said, first you have to gain high status and then definite goodness. So that kind of gets at your point.
Yeah.
Like, so the high status means first you have to be ethical, right? Or high status isn't some political or social high status. He's saying, Nagarjuna said, first your behavior has to be good, right? You have to be an ethical person. Then you'll have better, that's like an inner high status in a way, and then also you'll have better rebirths and better, what's the word? Conscience in a way. And then you can develop the ability to meditate based on that, because your mind starts to stabilize, right? So then you can meditate, and then once the mind is that steady through meditation, then you can use that steady mind to undermine, through reasoning, right? The reasonings of philosophy and so to undermine wrong understandings and wrong views and so on. So I think from a traditional Buddhist point of view, that would be the way to answer that question. But does that get it? You know, I think there's other stuff.
I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, okay, so that would be right then, yeah. So from a Buddhist perspective, that would be the way of thinking about it, though, in a sense. And it's good, I mean, that way we can even look at ourselves and realize, well, actually, check. If you try it yourself, you'll see, right, that if you sit down to meditate and you're in the middle of something that's like, what's the word? Negative, right, where you're doing something. Yeah, conflict where you're doing something, you're not going to be able to calm your mind at all, hardly, right? Like, I mean, it's still okay to try, but it's not going to be that effective. So we can see that experientially, right? Whereas the more you're living in a kind of way that's at peace and in harmony with others, the easier it is to meditate. Yeah, and the same thing, right? If you try to study like those really, the concepts of selflessness or emptiness, where your mind isn't, or it's like, it won't work, right? Like, in other words, lots of people try that and they just can't. It's like, it doesn't sink in. I mean, in the West we're kind of intellectualized, so maybe we can understand it a little bit intellectually, but it doesn't sink in if you're not feeling some sense of inner calm. It'll just be intellectual, but it won't start to affect you unless you can kind of do that too. So you can see that it really is somewhat sequential. Yeah, other comments or questions?
So you say, like, if you develop compassion, you don't have to treat everybody the same, right?
Yeah, you don't have to treat, yeah. Well, because actually it would be silly, right? Like, one thing is like, because even if you develop compassion, right? Even if you develop compassion that's equal, right? Like, whereas, use a metaphor that the Dalai Lama used, like, some people like spicy food, and some people like sweet food, and some people like salty. Like, so if you said, well, now I have equanimity, so everybody has to eat the same kind of food, that would be silly, right? Like, or so if you have actual compassion, then you can empathize with other people. And actually, I think then the idea is not to treat everybody exactly the same, but it's to treat everybody with an equal sense of compassion. But if one person, it's like that, like Shantideva in his prayer points out. He says, I mean, he doesn't point it out, but he prays, right? His dedication prayer, where he says, for those needing a doctor, may I help them in that way. For those needing food, may I help them in that way. For those needing a teacher, may I help them in that way. For those help, so he points out that if you have compassion, what Shantideva I think is hinting at there, right, is that then how you behave is based on what the need of the other is, really, and also what you have to give. Or it's like, sometimes relationally you don't have the ability to, if they need a neurosurgeon, and I'm not a neurosurgeon, I'm not going to try to do that, but I might give them advice about how to find one. But so it would be based on the need of the other, then, in a way. Right?
So what do they mean, like, may I become a bridge? I mean, how can you become a bridge?
Well, I'll say one thing. I mean, there are two answers to that. One is like, they say that an actual Buddha can manifest in all different ways. That's one answer. But the other is like, actually I had a friend who was like that, who was very compassionate, who then, some people here know them, right? They went to, they were visiting Vietnam and they built bridges so that children could get to school, And it was out of their sense of compassion, right? But they went there and they saw the need, right? They were visiting and they realized these kids couldn't get to school, or it took them hours. They had to get up like in the middle of the night practically to get to school on time, and then they weren't getting there. And so out of their compassion, they came back and they fundraised and they went back and they built the bridges so that the kids could get to school better. So that way you can, right? Your compassion really can manifest a bridge, of course. So it's like that. It's a good choice, because I really, somebody really did that one recently. Not that recently, a while ago, but yeah. Well, maybe I'll change topics just slightly, because I want to just continue on this. So we're talking about this series of classes is on developing bodhicitta, right? So the very first training is what we just did, is this kind of basic equanimity. And so right, because bodhicitta means, right, having compassion, that it means living actually with compassion, right, and a compassion that encompasses all beings, right. So you can't develop so the reason they do equanimity first, right, is that you can't develop compassion that encompasses all beings if you're still relating to others through these exaggerations, right. It's impossible. And so, there's a clear differentiation then. Like, according to Buddhist psychology, any compassion is a good thing, right? Compassion is always a positive state of mind. But there's a difference between, like, what's there to say this? There's a difference between compassion, like, that's sort of, I don't know, call it partisan, and then compassion that's universal, right? That's clearly there's a difference there, right? And that's obvious, right, in this sense that, I mean, if you look, actually, even, well, actually, even the people we were talking about, even people who do really bad things, oftentimes do have compassion for, like, for example, like, so to say, like you can see oftentimes where, so if somebody harms the person who they identify with, they sort of have compassion for that, but then they use that as a basis for wanting to hurt the person who hurt their friend, right? So that's not, that is compassion. The moment, I mean, the first step of it might be compassion, right? They see their friend hurt and they feel a sense of compassion, but then because they have an uneven mind, right, they say, oh, I have compassion for this, and the solution to that is to hurt this person, right? That's no longer compassion. Then they've gone from compassion to anger, right? Or hatred or something. So that's not, so the goal in Buddhism, obviously, is not to cultivate that kind of mind. And so, there's a recognition, this really a very practical psychological recognition, right? That before you're going to try to cultivate deeper compassion, it's helpful to have this more even mind. So that then when you cultivate a stronger sense of compassion, it's going to be, in a sense, so that, so that it's both for the person harmed and for the harmer, right? Because actually they're both harmed, really. For a Buddhist point of view, they're both unhappy. They're both suffering. So the idea is that you first cultivate this kind of more sense of equanimity or even mind, right? And then you start to cultivate love and then compassion. And then bodhicitta is, right, is grounded in the sense of universal compassion, and then that unusual attitude, right, of personal responsibility for the welfare of others, and then bodhicitta, mind. But and so there are various ways of training in bodhicitta and cultivating bodhicitta. But I thought before we get to that, I just wanted to talk about something related, which is this idea. Because I guess I want to say there are two different things. One is like to try to realize bodhicitta, right? And to try to realize bodhicitta, which means actually to realize it means that you eventually, through training your mind over a long period of time, you reach a point where you're spontaneously living your life in that way, right? So that you wake up in the morning and you immediately feel, oh, great, I have another day to try to be of benefit to others and to try to achieve enlightenment for others, right? Like, you go to work and you feel, I'm here to be of benefit to all beings. How wonderful. Like I have another day to do that, right? You come across somebody and your interaction with them is based on compassion for them, but also with a kind of implied compassion for all beings, right? That is in the back of your mind, this feeling of, I'm helping, this recognition that because, in a way, it's very realistic, right? Because all beings are interrelated and there's a sense of interdependence, right? That there's this recognition that you're helping one person, but through that your motivation is to help all beings, right? So that's the attitude of a bodhisattva. So to realize that, you have to train your mind in these different meditation trainings. In other words, it doesn't just happen spontaneously. People don't realize bodhicitta without effort. By definition, you have to train your mind in that. But so before we get to the actual series of meditations on how you cultivate that, I wanted to say though that one basic training we can do that's very nice, I think, is the training in having, like what the Dalai Lama calls a good heart. Khenpo Rinpoche was recently calling it a good mind, right? He was talking about that. And so that training, right, is that even though we haven't realized bodhicitta yet, right, in other words, we haven't realized in the sense that it's there in your dreams, right? Even when you're dreaming, if there's somebody who's realized bodhicitta, even in their dreams it's there. Even the moment they wake up, every time while they're eating, while they're doing everything, right? But still we can train ourselves like that, right? So even if your first thought when you wake up isn't, like you don't want to wake up and immediately think, wow, how wonderful, I'm alive and I can be of benefit to all beings and I'm trying to become enlightened for all beings. Even if that's not what you think when you first wake up. Some of you may be, I think Paul might be. But you gotta smile like maybe that was it. But even if it's not what you think when you first wake up in the morning, you can consciously make an effort to think that way, right? Whereas, and that's a good training, right? So actually you think, then you would think, right, in the morning you would think something like, life is brief. I am glad to be alive today. Not everybody is, right? People died last night. And I want to live this day meaningfully, right? And what's the most meaningful way to live my life? It's with compassion and with love, right? So it takes effort, right? Whereas there's a difference between the spontaneous attitude of a person who's already trained their mind, right? Because they've habituated to it. Even if we haven't, Well, one of the part of the process is that we can, through effort, develop that feeling, right? And then you can get to work, right? And you can actually train your mind again, right? You can think as you're going into a place, right? Well, I could have the attitude I'm just here to make money, or I'm just here to whatever, gain some status, or have people think a certain way, but that's not very meaningful. Doesn't really help me. I may die today, so that's not. Those things are not that important. What matters is I want to live my life with love and with compassion. So I'm here to be of benefit to others and to make progress on the path to enlightenment, to be of benefit to others in the long run. Same thing, right? Like you can do that. I just want to point out, like, actually that you can do anywhere, right? Whereas that's a training that it's a mental training, right? It's not, again, what we were getting at earlier, nobody may know, right? There was, somebody might notice, oh wow, he's not being as much of a jerk or something, but other than that, nobody has to know that you're doing that, right? Actually, they say in the mind training teaches, it says it's better to keep it secret, right? It's better not to advertise that. But it's a very good thing to do in one's mind, right? So, because it helps, because it does help you to be, one is it's a training, it's a part of the process of developing bodhicitta. But then also, just naturally, right, your mind becomes more peaceful, your behavior becomes a little more peaceful, right? You're a little less annoying to others. And then also, one other thing is, actually, from a Buddhist point of view, you create a lot of good karma that way, right? Whereas if you're living because the definition of good karma is an action done with a good motivation, right? It's not the behavior itself, it's the motivation, right? So if you are just working, right, but you're thinking in your mind, well, I'm here for the benefit of all beings, to be of service to the people around me, and then also to train my mind so I can be more and more of service to all beings, something like that. If that's your attitude, right, then it's a very positive action. Whereas the same behavior, if you're just thinking, well, I have no choice, I have to be here, whatever. First of all, you're not happy, right, in that. And then secondly, you're not helping others, and thirdly, you're not benefiting yourself. So actually, any behavior you can do that with. I just want to emphasize, does that make sense? Like, as in Lama Zopa sometimes does that. He calls that, lately, in the last, decade or something, Lama Zopa Rinpoche started calling that Mahayana mindfulness. Right, so he was differentiating it, because there's an ordinary mindfulness, right, where you're just aware of your moment-to-moment experience, right? That's general mindfulness. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche said Mahayana mindfulness is different, actually, right? Then there is the Mahayana mindfulness means you're cultivating the mindfulness of a bodhisattva, right? So the mindfulness of a bodhisattva is I'm going to be in this moment. Like, there's ordinary mindfulness, which people a lot of people have written books about, right? Is I'm just going to be in the moment and notice what's going on, right? And that's valid. But Mahayana mindfulness is cultivating the mindfulness of a bodhisattva. Right, it's like cultivating the archetype of bodhisattva is Avalokiteshvara, who's the Dalai Lama, right? So in that sense, Mahayana mindfulness, right, is each moment I'm going to be in this moment with a sense of universal compassion, right, and with a sense of bodhicitta, with a sense of love and compassion for all beings, right? So that's different. You can see those are two very different things, right? Or it's because if you imagine, like, for example, eating mindfully, right? If you're eating in a generally mindful way, you notice the flavors, right? And you notice, okay, the texture, like the texture of the food, the color of the food, and the flavor of the food, right? So if you were eating with Mahayana mindfulness, it's a different practice, right? You may be doing those things too. You're still noticing those, but then your attitude is different, right? Because there's a feeling of and a thought, right? In this moment, I'm interdependent with all beings, right? This food, and actually, so if you were doing, I'll actually give an experiential thing, right? I'm just giving an example of eating a salad or something, right? So if you're eating a salad with mindfulness, you're noticing the colors, the textures, and the flavors, right? But if you're eating with Mahayana mindfulness, then what's the thought? The thought is, wow, I'm interdependent with all beings, right? And even this salad, right, came from where, right? It wasn't produced causelessly. It didn't suddenly appear out of space, right? It was produced, right, through causes and conditions, right? And even the eating of this implies to me my interdependence with others, right? Not just with the farmers, but with the previous ones on for generations back, and then for all the insects and so on. And many insects died, right, in the harvesting of this, even if it's vegetarian, right? I'm not pure vegetarian, but I'm giving an example of somebody, a salad, right? Just give me a simple example, right? So then, truckers and grocery workers and whoever, like so many beings were interrelated with this experience of just this one salad, right? Came from all, and maybe if there's different ingredients, then it came from all different places, right? And so there's a feeling then of incredible appreciation for the kindness of others, right? And then a wish to repay that kindness, right? And then a feeling, okay, so I feel appreciative and grateful to eat this salad, but I'm eating it to sustain my body so I can continue training in order to repay the kindness of all those beings, in order to be present in relationship to them as what they most need, right? And if I'm going to do that, right, the best way to do that is to make progress on the path, right? And ultimately, if I could become enlightened, then I'll be most present to others in the most effective way. So the best thing I can do is eat this with a sense of wishing to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, right? And with a sense of empathy and love and compassion for all beings, and a wanting to make progress in order to be able to be of ultimate benefit to them, right? And then one is eating with that kind of feeling, right? So it's two different. You can see how it's two different kinds of experience in the moment, right? The same thing if you're like if you're taking a walk, right? If you're taking a walk with mindfulness, right, ordinary mindfulness, then you're noticing, which is actually different. If you're taking a walk with no mindfulness, then you're just like walking around thinking, I don't know, thinking whatever you're thinking, right? Thinking about somebody who you're mad at, or thinking about what people are, what do they think of me? People I'm walking, whatever. You're thinking something like that. If you're walking with ordinary mindfulness, then you're noticing the steps and the sounds and the colors around you, right? But then if you're walking with Mahayana mindfulness, you'll see it's totally different, right? Actually, then you're like Lama Yeshe, right? There was a story, you've heard that before, right? The funny story of Lama Yeshe, where he was outside walking, somebody was walking at night and they were upset and they turn a corner and they bump into Lama Yeshe. And they say, Lama, what are you doing out here? He said, I'm looking for somebody who needs help, And then they both keep walking, and then suddenly the person goes, "Hey, wait a second, I need help. Come back." And he says, "Oh, really? Okay, that's why I was out here." Right? So if one is walking with Mahayana mindfulness, one is like that, right? One is walking around saying, "I'm walking around to be of benefit to all beings. Who needs help in the universe?" Right? So you get the difference. This totally different state of mind, right? So same thing if you're going to work, right? Whereas it's totally different, right? If you go to work and you think, ordinary person, right? Then they go to work and they think, what? Like, I don't know. A lot of people just go to work thinking. Actually, I just read something like, I forget what the percent. Most Americans don't like their job, right? So then I guess most people are going to work thinking, oh hell, I have to go to work today. And then if you're going to work with mindfulness, then you think, okay, I'm going to let go of such thoughts and be present. I'm going to breathe, right? Well, that's good. It's better than not. It's better than just thinking I hate my job. But Mahayana mindfulness is totally different, right? Whereas then then you're going to work and you're thinking, right, I'm here, right, I feel appreciative to have, whereas again, you recognize interdependence, right? In other words, you're recognizing it's only through these, conditions, right, that I'm able to live and that others are able to live and that we depend on each other, right, to produce food and shelter and clothing and everything else that we need, and a lot of things we don't need. And then there's a recognition, right, that actually everything that I have that makes me okay and makes me happy and makes me live comes from others, right? Even the ability to think, right? There was language and so on. I learned all that from others, right? everything I am and everything I have that's of any value came from my relations with others. And so I owe something back, right? And I want to repay their kindness. And so I'm going to work also with a sense of this is an opportunity to be around others and to repay that with others. And then also, right, bodhisattvas have to train, so work is excellent, right? Sometimes I'll get a chance to practice patience. Well, that's good for me. Sometimes I'll get a chance to practice, joyous effort, right? And making an effort to try to help others. Sometimes I can have empathy for the people around me, right? I can provide some service or some help, and so my motivation is that, right? Is to be of benefit to others and to progress on the path and become enlightened. So you see the difference? It's like a totally different state of mind. And I want to point out something, like in Buddhism, in the Buddhist teachings on karma, right? Remember that we talked about this in the class on karma for those who were here, but like karma is totally dependent on the mind, right? Whereas, so in other words, we often give that example, there are already examples like that, right? Like, so if somebody gives a gift with the wish to, have everybody think they're cool, right? That's not a positive karma, right? In other words, even though the act looks like positive because it's giving a gift, whereas if the motivation is, wow, I want everybody to think I'm so special, well, that's an act. That's the same as I mean, that's self-aggrandizement, right? And that's not positive state of mind, so it's not a positive action, right? Whereas if somebody gives a gift with compassion for the person they're giving the gift to, right, then that becomes a positive action. But it's a positive action in relation to one person, right? But if somebody gives a gift with the motivation of being of benefit to an infinite number of beings, right, then it becomes an infinite act, right? And so, again, though, it's important, like what a few people were getting at earlier about the behavior thing, right? Whereas that the behavior, the external appearance is less important than the state of heart of the person doing the action in terms of the meaning behind the behavior and what the results of that behavior will be interpersonally. And we often think in our culture, I think again because we're extroverted, we think that like a really big action, externally big action has a big result and externally small action has a small result. Buddhism says that's not necessarily true, actually. What Buddhism says is that it's the state of the mind of the person doing the action that mainly determines how beneficial or not beneficial it is.
Example, Hitler. Like my teenage son would say, well, he had good intentions for the world.
And that's where, again, though, like the key is important, actually, really. You know, that Buddhist perspective is not, what's the way to say it? This is really important. I'm trying to think the right way to say it. That what the determining factor is not what one says one's intentions are, but is whether, and only the person themselves, or is only oneself. I mean, or as I can only judge my own state of mind, but that. But sometimes you can see through another person's behavior. It doesn't seem to be this, right? But that the key is there first of all that sense of even-mindedness, of peace of mind, right? And then is there a sense of, for example, if it's done with a genuine sense of love, right, wanting others to be happy, or a genuine sense of compassion, wanting others to be free from suffering, then that's a positive state of mind from Buddhist perspective. Taking the example, like, I don't know a ton, but I know some, right? Like taking the example of Hitler, for example, like, you know, there are many stories, right? Even before he was in power, right? When he would sit around with other people after World War I, and there was a sense of anger, right? I often think of this as an example of the fault. Like this is an example to me in my own contemplation. This is an example of why small actions can have big results. Or it's not an example of why, but it's an example of how, right? You sometimes think he was a what's the word, right? He had been a soldier in World War I, right? And then how many times has this happened? A bunch of soldiers hanging out in a bar, being angry and complaining, right? That's actually what was happening, right? That was how his movement started, right? He was hanging out in a bar saying, you know, those this and those that, right? With a sense of anger, actually, right? And a little bit of anger, right? Then other people say, they were like that and this, you know, and yeah, you know, the whatever, you know, and starting to then cultivate more and more anger, right? Yeah, the British did this to us, and the French did that, and
But in his mind, I don't know because I'm not him, whatever, but what if he really believed what he was doing was for the benefit of the world?
the key is this:
he had a sick mind,
right.
whatever.
But the key is like if we take it
wrong.
The key is if we apply it to ourselves, though, there's a useful thing there, which is, if we say I'm doing this for the benefit of all beings, but there's not compassion in our heart, then that's not the training. Does that make sense? So in other words, and if there's compassion for some and anger to others, then again, that's not the training. So that's the way to judge for ourselves. In other words, if you apply your question to oneself, then that's the way to judge it. In other words, so like if I look for myself, right? If I say I'm going to, like if I were to say, take the example of the center, right? If I say I'm going to the center to be of benefit to others, right? And then if I start to say because I think other religions are so stupid and I like Buddhism and I want to promote Buddhism and outcompete some other, you know, right? Well, I can judge for myself that's not positive anymore, right? Even though I'm saying to myself, I'm just giving a negative example, right? If I were to do that, right, then I would have to say, well, okay, I'm saying to myself I'm doing it to be a benefit, but actually it's with a sense of prejudice and with a sense of egotism, right? And then I would say that's not actually, one has to judge oneself in that moment, right?
What if you don't judge yourself correctly?
So what Buddhism was, first of all, anybody can make a mistake, of course, but the real criteria is understand. You know, this is actually was a good question, right? Like, so so much of actually Buddhist psychology is describing our inner states of mind for us in order to get better at introspection. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of there's a lot of descriptions, for example, and the reason they exist is not for somebody else, they're for me, or in your case for you, or in your case for, but there are a lot of descriptions of these positive states of mind and then distorted states of mind, with the goal being for us to get better at, because none of us starts out great at this, or perfect by any means, right? But the goal in Buddhist training is that you study the mind, actually, right? And that's the purpose of that's the purpose of actual study, right? And then it's also the purpose of meditation. Is the idea is that you have to get better and better slowly, at understanding your mind, so that you can at least recognize, oh wow, that's arisen. That's not real compassion. That's a false form. To differentiate between, there are a lot of subtle differences, right? Like the difference between compassion and sort of that identification with others, right? Where you're identifying, and that's not real compassion, that's just sort of like they're mine, or they're supporting me, and so we have to, so you have to kind of really get good at this introspection, and it's only through that we can get better at it. Otherwise, anybody can rationalize anything. And so the idea in Buddhism, anyway, would be that it's our own responsibility then. And that part of our responsibility is to get better at that introspection and to get better over time at catching ourselves, because we'll all make mistakes. And then also in Buddhism, you're supposed to sit down each night, for example. One of the trainings is you do your best in the morning to set your motivation, right, and to do that. But then one of the tasks of a Buddhist practitioner is to sit down at night and you go over your day and you say, well, how did I do, actually? Was I genuinely compassionate, or did I become egocentric or prideful or angry or jealous or something else? And was I, and one of the best trainings is that, right, is to sort of, actually that's one of the most meaningful trainings, is at night you sit down and you contemplate that, and if you catch yourself having, even if you were doing it in a kind of self-justified way, the task of a practitioner is to say, oh wow, I did that, okay, and to acknowledge it, and then say, okay, how tomorrow can I do a little better, and then the next day, how can I do a little better? And that's all we can do, and we have to do our best, but really that's the task, is every morning to sort of start out saying, I'm going to do my best to have a good motivation, and as long as we're still alive, each night to look back at our day and say, how did I do, where did I go wrong, where did I sort of get off track, and how can I bring myself back more effectively? Nobody's going to be perfect, but that's the best we can do. So that's our task really as practitioners, is to keep catching ourselves and readjusting and getting better and better at honesty with ourselves.
What did you say, in terms of with her, what she was saying with the Hitler example and everything, that, you can't trick your karma? Just because you think something, if it's coming from unconscious hatred and these tendencies and everything, you're still going to be propagating those tendencies if you're acting out of that. Even if you say to yourself, oh, this is for the good, it's not like you can trick what's really happening, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, anger is anger and attachment is attachment, for example, and those will always cause suffering.
Right.
And actually, one easy way, I'll say one more comment, then I want Beth had her hand up, but I'll say one more comment that I find very useful from Lama Zopa Rinpoche's, for my own contemplation of myself. It was an advice I read many years ago from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, where he said, I'm going to elaborate for a moment, because he said it in different places, but he's basically said, if you're living your life with compassion, right, with genuine compassion, then you will feel a sense of inner peace, tranquility, and extreme happiness. And so he said, so if you're not happy, you're not peaceful, you're not living with compassion. And I remember at the time I was really upset, because I was working with developmentally disabled children. I was an intern. I was going to school. I was really stressed out. And I remember thinking, at the time I was I feel kind of stressed out. I don't feel very happy. I feel more stressed. And I was like, oh wow, the external of my life, it would look like I'm working with kids with disabilities. It should be, I sort of thought, because I was extroverted, I sort of thought, well, I'm doing a behavior that's helping others. I must be living with compassion. And then I was as I introspected, what I thought was, oh wow, no, I'm not. I'm not living with hatred or something like that, but I was sort of I was just doing what I was doing. But there wasn't an inner sense of actual experience of compassion most of the time. There wasn't moments, but as I started analyzing my experience moment to moment, I was like, yeah, I had 5 minutes of compassion today, and the rest of the day I was just stressed out and rushing around. And I was like, oh, that's not, so I had to be honest with myself and say, well, I'm not doing so well. And so there's an easy way of, I mean, that's one easy way of judging for yourself privately, right? Well, how am I doing with compassion? Am I really feeling a sense of inner peace and tranquility? And it's not to like say, therefore I'm bad if I'm not tranquil, but it's to say, well, honestly, that I'm doing mediocre. You know, if I'm only mediocrely tranquil, then I'm only mediocrely compassionate. Or so it's an easy, like, what I realized from that advice of Lama Zorbashis is like, oh, wow, that's a really useful tool for introspection.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But Beth, you had a comment or?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion. So, well, I'll just throw out my 2 cents and say I don't think Hitler had any good intention for the world except for his own political party and people that aligned with him. But not that I'm trying to
I don't
say
think
your
he did,
comment.
no, I did not think personally.
No, but I understood the
I
point.
think
But,
he thought, what I wanted to.
right.
That in his mind, that was his reality.
Yes.
And he thought he was doing wonderful things for the world, obviously. You know,
Well,
I-
no, that wasn't my point though. I just was starting off with that. But I'm saying maybe on a similar note, like I think suicide bombers often have the same kind
Right,
of,
right.
you know, I mean Hitler was a megalomaniac, right?
Mm.
And well, we don't need to go down that road, but suicide bombers, that's their whole premise, is that they truly and fundamentally believe that what they are doing is not an act of violence as a means to an end, but like, I mean, it's just, it has this whole larger implication. But I remember hearing something, an interview with the Dalai Lama recently, that it's an old interview, but I saw it on the internet recently when I was trying to look at something. And he was asked about the self-immolations, and you know, that isn't this, of course, you know, nobody's encouraging that, as this isn't necessarily something desirable to do, but when I think about, and I think, you know, it was interesting to hear his response, when you think about acts of violence, on the surface, self-immolation, you know, setting yourself on fire is an act of violence. It's the taking of the physical body, and it's clearly an act of violence. However, I think what the Dalai Lama had to say about this is that, well, they're actually practicing compassion in a way. I shouldn't say that's what he said exactly, because I can't remember, don't quote me. You gotta go and look this stuff up yourself. But it was something along the lines that what they're doing, not that he was not at all encouraging it, but he was trying to say is that they chose to take their own life rather than act out and harming others for what they believe in. So there's, I think, a difference in terms of the intent would be there. That
I
for
think
me would cut to
the important point, if I'm
you know,
understanding what Lauren's saying correctly, is that there's more factors than your belief system that's determining it. You know, it's like your mental state that's determining the karma of the action is a lot more than just your belief system. Would you say that's correct?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you believe you're doing something great for the world, if you're Hitler or whatever, but you're filled with hatred and self-aggrandizement or whatever, it's still good. It's still a negative act. I mean, your belief is just a very real. It's pretty much just a very surface
right,
kind
so
of
but
thing.
that gets to the intent too. So if the monks are setting themselves on fire with an intent, you know, that is not malicious, but of trying to care about the community, and in fact, even, you know, I heard from another Lama when I asked a particular question recently about the topic of Tibet, that, you know, even sometimes when you protest, it's also, you don't want the quote unquote, I mean, he didn't use this word enemy, I'm using this word, like the quote unquote enemy, I put it in quotes because it's not really the enemy, right? But you don't want them to incur more bad karma by them continuing their wrong actions of oppression, for example. So that there's a need to speak out in a healthy sort of way to do that, good intent and peaceful intent. So all this is, I think, circling back to what this discussion is about, right? I mean, trying to have good motivation and intent from a peaceful, positive place instead of like fear and anger based.
Didn't the Buddha, like, in a past life, isn't there a story, like, he killed somebody to, like, help them with their karma? He took on the bad karma of killing them or something?
Yeah, there's a story.
Isn't there a story like that?
Yeah, there's one story.
Yeah.
The story of the sea cat. But I guess so let's see. Yeah. So I want to be sure I want to cover one more topic. So before we have to stop, so I think it'll be useful to touch on it. So the idea, though, right? I think one want to connect it back to equanimity and then just connect it to the one. I just want to at least bring up the next meditation because then we're going to get into it next time. So the idea behind equanimity, though, right? I just want to go back to that for a moment more directly, and it's this it's that. Actually, I think it's an important point, right? One is that it's realistic, right? In other words, I think it's an important point. Like, whereas that these things, like, because following up on what you're saying about belief systems, right? There is one thing at least in Buddhist training is that actually all belief systems should be challenged, also by oneself, right? There is that one's job is to challenge one's own beliefs through reason, right? And so, for example, these ideas, so the ideas of friends, enemies, and strangers, right? I mean, that's not so much a belief system, although it can be, but it's more a way of we relate to others. But we're actually trying to use reason in that sense, right? To challenge our assumptions about how we feel and think about other people, right? And so, in other words, and almost all many Buddhist trainings rely on that, on reasoning. And then there's another, so I want to say, when I was talking about this, actually I want to bring up one other thing. When I was talking about the thing of introspection, right? So one point I made about if you're not feeling peaceful, if you're not feeling joyful, then it's probably not compassion. There's another, though, which is also like, whereas if you're feeling a sense of my group and their group, that's also not a good sign of how you're doing in terms of realistic, right? Because those are, although there can be conventional groups, of course, right? Whereas if you believe there's anything permanent or static or concrete about that, actually a group is just a mental idea, right? In other words, a group of people can stand in one, like in other words, I could say, okay, this group of people on this side of the room and that group on that side of the room, that's a valid term, right? But it doesn't have any particular, it has no intrinsic meaning other than whoever happened to sit in one place today. And in a way, all groups are like that. In other words, they're labels, right, based on some contemporary conditions. So if you start to over-concretize those, that's not a good sign, right, that you're doing, it's not a sign that you're being realistic. And, and in terms of what Beth was saying, right, that I always want to make this other comment too, that then there is that we all have to be our own judge, so whether it's whereas ultimately, you can judge other people, it's fine, but the most effective judgments are about our own minds because that's what we can change. You can give other people advice, and that's fine, there's nothing bad with that, but but the hard part is actually it's much, there's an old saying, right, if you point your one finger out, there's usually at least three pointing back towards you. That's an old saying, but that the most important advice we have to give is to ourselves. Because we're the ones who can change our own minds or not change our own minds. So we have to judge our own minds in the moment to see how we're doing, and then give ourselves feedback, right? And then, so now I want to bring up one more point, just in terms of cultivating compassion. And I already brought up this idea of interdependence, right? Which is definitely, again, and these are all, that idea, right, in Buddhism, this idea that we're interdependent with others. Actually, the Dalai Lama says, and actually he follows other Buddhist teachers, it's not just him. So the Buddhism says, right, that actually if you look at Buddhism, actually there are two, you could actually summarize it in two things, really. One is the behavior is nonviolence, right? That one's behavioral approach should be peaceful and not violent, and that one's view, so the behavior should be nonviolence, and the view should be interdependence or dependent arising. That's the most simple summarization of Buddhism I've ever heard. If you look at all of Buddhism, you can actually encompass pretty much all of Buddhism in those two things, right? Nonviolence, which includes compassion. In Buddhist terminology, if you say nonviolent behavior, it means also compassionate behavior. And then a view is interdependence, right? And even for those of you who are there, right, even like the most subtle points of emptiness that Khen's Rinpoche was teaching at that retreat, right, they all come down to dependent arising, actually, right? So there's no matter how subtle you get in Buddhism, you don't escape dependent arising. That's the nature of phenomena. And so then in terms of, there's a relationship I want to bring up between interdependence or dependent arising and compassion. And I want to at least touch on it today while we have a few minutes. Sorry we didn't do this. We did a group discussion. We didn't do the small groups. Usually we do small group discussions, but I guess we had a whole group, so it didn't get to. But it's okay. So so this, in terms of the relationship, there are many relationships between interdependence or dependent arising and compassion. But one of them is this recognition of experiential recognition, of training in recognizing our own dependence upon others. And that's a really important training that many of these other trainings on developing bodhicitta is going to rely upon. And so it's this idea, right, that we tend not to notice, although we know it's true if we think about it. But the idea is, in Buddhist terms, they sometimes use this word the phrase of like remembering the kindness of others. Right? That's the term that's sometimes used. And again, I just want to bring it up because oftentimes as we go around our daily lives, if you see somebody driving down the road, right, in Washington area, most people don't think, oh, how kind they are. You don't start to get tearful thinking they're so kind. That's not the normal reaction. Right? And yet that's the Buddhist stance. In other words, is that we're interdependent with others, and actually this idea that all of our happiness in the past, the present, and the future only arises in dependence upon others. Right? It's a fairly radical idea, right? And especially to really emphasize that. But part of the training in Buddhism would be to train your mind, right, to see that, because ordinarily we don't view others that way, right? And the idea is to train your mind to see that aspect of others, right? And I just think that's an intriguing idea. So I want to start it with it because we're going to meditate on it next time in various ways. But so in Buddhism, right? If you look, actually, I'm going to do it in the reverse order of usual, just for a moment while we have time. So I'm going to go future, present, past, okay, instead of past, present, future, like we usually do. So the idea in Buddhism, I just want to at least present this idea, is that in the future, right? So future happiness. What Buddhism says is if you want to become enlightened, actually you're completely dependent on others. Whereas nobody can become enlightened independently. First of all, you have to depend on teachers, right, to teach you the path. And then also if you look at the trainings that Buddhism says you have to practice to become enlightened, they're all dependent on others, right? You can't practice generosity unless you have somebody to give to, right? So if you say I'm going to be generous on my own, it's totally stupid, right? Like it's an insane idea, right? You have to have other people to practice generosity. If you want to practice patience, right? Shantideva says it's a big problem that you really need annoying people. And he says sometimes it's difficult because the more kind you get, sometimes they say in Buddhism that the more compassionate you get, the more difficult that is. Actually, to find people who will still be difficult to you. And sometimes you have to go out searching. Please, I have to find somebody really, who will be difficult to anybody, so they'll be difficult, right? Like Shantideva says something, and Atisha, right? They both said things like that. So you have to go seek out difficult people. Most of us don't have that problem. We have an easier time with that, but so you get a lot more blessings, yeah. If you want to, actually anything, right? And then also so if we look in the future, I don't want to get off topic. So if we're looking in the future, right? All of our trainings actually to become enlightened are totally dependent on others, right? And there is so all those different things, right? To have a sense of spiritual community is one of the requirements, right? The sangha. Well, there's no sangha without other people, right? So all those different, so many of those trainings, right? Ethics also, the trainings in ethics, right? But you can't have ethics if you don't have other people, right? Because in other words, the ethics of not stealing means you're not stealing from somebody, right? The ethics of not having sexual misconduct means you're relational with other people and then you're being ethical, right? The ethics of being honest means you're being honest with somebody, right? Whereas that's part of the training in ethics, right? Is to be an honest, forthright person. But you can't do that alone, right? You need other people to train in those things. So if you look at the future, right? All the good qualities of the path are totally dependent on the kindness of others, right? Whereas if they're not around, if there's not a beggar around, you can't practice generosity. If there's not somebody to be honest to, you're not going to be honest, and so on. And so if you contemplate in that way, you start to see others as incredibly precious, is the idea, right? That your relationships with them are precious and that they're precious. And that's true. And notice in this idea, right, it's not just the people who are overtly nice to you, right? The one you're practicing patience with is also kind to you in that sense, right? The beggar is also kind to you. So the idea there is that if you look in the future, right, you start to see that you view everybody actually, as one of the contemplations is you view everybody as kind, right? Then in the present, the contemplation, right, is you actually contemplate how, actually, we don't usually think this way again, right? But actually, everything I have that I need actually does come from others, right? I started to mention this earlier, right? But like, right? I mean, we can. It's obvious, right, with our clothes, right? And there isn't. I don't think anybody here made every item they're wearing, right? I don't. It's definitely not, right? The vehicle we got here in, right? This place, right? The food we eat, right? And then even, right, like our ability to think, actually, right? Like, in other words, like if it weren't for the kindness of our teachers, right, the people who taught us in elementary school, our parents, our aunts and uncles, the people who actually taught us stuff, mostly parents, right? It's mostly who teach us, but also other, and teachers, but then also other relatives and so on. Right, so even any good thought I have, anything I can learn, right? Sometimes we think, like everything we've learned actually also came from it came from books, other people produced them. It came from videos, other people produced them. It came from, right? Everything came from others. And then even the joy we get in our relationships, right, comes from others, right? So even like the happiness you get from, your family, well, it depends on your family, right? And so on, right? Even our body came from others, right? Our body didn't arise, we didn't produce it ourselves, right? And then, and actually, if you start to contemplate that, if you go into it like in a real contemplative way, actually going through it step by step, right? It's actually very touching, isn't it? I mean, if you think back to when you were, we don't think about that. Or you think back to when you were an infant, right? You were totally, like, actually, a bug is more independent than you were, right? Like, in other words, an insect can live on its own. You couldn't, right? Like, you were more helpless than a cockroach, right? And people took care of you, like, right? Like cockroaches can go find their food and water, right? You couldn't. Actually, somebody had to feed you, right? And we don't think about that very often. But if you spend time thinking about it, it's actually very touching, right? Like, so, and if you imagine, like, you didn't understand language and somebody taught you, you didn't know how to read, right? Somebody taught you to read. Right? And actually, people took a lot of patience. If you don't, we don't think about it. We don't sit down and think about it for hours, right? But in Buddhist meditation, you do, actually, right? So you think back and you think, wow, like, I would be illiterate if these people hadn't taught me to read, right? I would have died if these people hadn't fed me, right? And then the way, if you think of, like, again, like, in our culture, sometimes it's not considered, I don't know what the word is, like, hip or modern or something to think about it, but actually you think of kindness, especially of parents, it's unbelievable, right? Like, those of you who are parents, then right? But, like, the incredible hardships that parents go through is actually amazing, right? And oftentimes, like, it's funny, I sometimes think that when people are parents, they notice it, but we don't tend to notice about our own parents, or grandparents and so on. Like, it's easier to notice when that's self-centered, right? You can notice when you're doing it, but not the kindness of the other. So it's a whole contemplation, right? So if you think about the present, actually, everything is totally dependent on others, right? Even your body and even your body is, right? The existence of it and its current existence, and then all your abilities to think and contemplate and learn all depend on others, right? And then the Buddhist meditation for the past, one is that in general, right, there is what was true in the future and present is also true in the past. So in general, that's true. But then there's a Buddhist meditation that, we just have time to briefly mention. So then there's a Buddhist meditation which comes in one of the two methods for generating bodhicitta, which is the kindness of the mother. Right? This one can be challenging for some people, I know, but at least want to bring it up. And in that one, actually one starts off doing the contemplation I was just describing, thinking in this life, right? So imagining oneself as a fetus, and then as an infant, and then a toddler, thinking about the kindness one received. And one contemplates how, one received kindness from a lot of beings, right? But in this human realm, that the main kindness comes from a primary caregiver who's, usually oftentimes it's the biological one, not always. It could be somebody else who plays that role. But who came from somebody who took that role of feeding and caring for you and changing your diapers or whatever, all that, right? And the Buddhist contemplation, which I think is an interesting contemplation, so I just want to mention it, is that you contemplate, first you have to contemplate that to the point where you actually feel it, right? Whereas these meditations aren't, they're reason-based in a way. I mean, it's true that people are kind to us, right? And it's true that we rely on others. But in this case, you want to really develop a sense of emotional connection to that as well. And then this is what's interesting, actually. So then you contemplate having received that kindness from all beings, or the Buddhist view is that we've been alive, that we've had lifetimes from beginningless time, right? So the idea then that you contemplate in this one, it's a mental training is you train in recognizing all beings. You imagine or you think about or you contemplate, let's put it that way. You contemplate all beings as having been kind to you like that. Right? So there is and actually that's why the Buddhist prayer says all mother sentient beings, right? Many Buddhist Tibetan prayers say all universal mother sentient beings or all mother sentient beings, right? And so the idea with that is that you actually contemplate that just as my mother in this life was kind to me, right? Actually contemplate, so she was also kind to me in countless previous lifetimes when she was also my mother. Then my father was also my father and my mother in countless previous lifetimes, right? Then strangers were also my mother in previous life. And so you develop this sense of, that's actually, when I said earlier when the Dalai Lama meets people and he says, like, home, like family, right? His attitude is because he's realized this training we have. We don't have that feeling because we didn't realize it. He has realized this training, so that's why he relates to everybody like his own mom, right? Like, whereas, so you meet the Dalai, somebody meets the Dalai Lama and he's like, he has this warm, familial, friendly, loving feeling towards people because he's trained himself over a long period of time to view everyone as intimate, right? And as kind. And so then he relates to people as intimate and kind, right? We don't do that because we haven't trained our mind that way, but we could. And that's the idea in this training, is that you train your mind to view everyone. And it's important, there's two aspects. In other words, like, you have to get at the emotional experience of it if you want to, the result is, the goal is it benefits. The goal is to bring your own benefit, right? Of training your mind like that brings you a lot of benefit, and then it brings others benefit. But the actual training, I just want to point out, has a couple of aspects. One is really viewing others as kind, right? In this life, but also in countless past lives, rather. But it's also viewing others, so it's viewing others as infinitely kind to me, and also as intimate with me, right? Whereas ordinarily we have the sense of distance, right, from others. But really trying to, why do you cultivate the sense of mother sentient beings, right? The idea is just there's this idea, right, of intimacy, really, and that's what it's trying to get at, is so that you live your life then, right? You develop a mind that lives and interacts all the time with the sense of appreciation, viewing others as kind and intimate, which is the foundation for love, actually, right? Whereas that leads to love, which leads to compassion, which leads to bodhicitta. So the idea would be that we have to kind of train our minds all so that, and just imagine that, right? Like, that the idea would be, right, that you would develop this feeling that everyone you meet then is the most kind, most precious, most intimate being to you, right? And that you kind of, and this feeling of appreciation and gratitude for them, right? And of wanting, and then comes wanting to repay that kindness, right? So that's actually the training. Does that make sense? And that's really the foundation for developing bodhicitta. So in other words, so I think it starts to get at some of the questions you guys were raising also, is like, how do you judge, right? Well, there's like, then we know, actually. In other words, like, if you really understand all those the trainings of how to develop bodhicitta, it becomes much easier. In other words, so you go out, you walk out somewhere, right, and somebody acts annoying to you, and it's not that hard if you're honest with yourself to say, well, did I have a feeling that they're intimate and precious and kind and I owe them infinitely? Or did I feel like, I'm here and they're there and they're annoying? And again, like, anybody can deceive ourselves. As I do it all the time. We all do, but at times. But if you understand, like, what a bodhisattva's attitude is and what we're trying to cultivate, right? If you work on it in meditation, so then you can develop that feeling a little bit in meditation, right? This feeling of intimacy and of warmth. But then if you go out and somebody, you interact with somebody and then you don't have that, right? Well, then right? In other words, then you have to kind of say to yourself, okay, well, I'm not there yet. That's okay, but how do I keep training? How do I make progress in that? You see what I'm getting at there? So, like, it really helps to understand these different trainings and these different ways that bodhisattvas, or the people who are cultivating bodhicitta, what mental states they cultivate towards others. Because then you have something to contrast your own experience with and to realize, well, am I making progress? Whereas it's not like you're going to go from, feeling completely disconnected with others, right, and completely separate and not appreciating them, to suddenly, like, seeing some stranger and sort of internally feeling overwhelmed with love, and where your heart's broken open, right? But you can get there, right? But it has to go gradually through, and the only way it comes, I just want to point that out, last thing, and then we'll stop, is it doesn't come just like from nowhere, right? Nothing, because in the Buddhist view, nothing arises from nothing, right? Everything arises depending on causes and conditions, right? So, like that sense of love and compassion and connectedness and warmth and appreciation and gratitude and viewing others as kind, whereas it doesn't come from just reading one book about this. It doesn't come from just thinking, yeah, others are kind. That's that seems cool, like, or that'd be an interesting idea. It doesn't come that way. That's fine, and nobody has to cultivate this. But if you want to cultivate that, right, first you have to understand how does a person cultivate it. But then, like anything else, it comes through effort and through time and through creating the right causes, right? So if you over and over again view somebody, right, and you can see that in your ordinary life, right? Whereas you see a stranger, you don't think anything of them, right? But then let's say they like they help you in some way, right? Then you start to think, oh wow, you start to see them in a different way. Oh, that person's so great, they help me, right? Actually, they're the same. They may be the same person. In other words, they didn't, but you start to see them in a different way because of your relationship, right? Like I remember, the surgeon who did surgery for me one time. Like when I first met him, I didn't think anything, right? But then, like as I got to know him, I thought, oh, he seems really great. Then he did a good job. And I think, oh wow, I have so much appreciation for him. Actually, he didn't change at all, right? He was doing that for other people. It was just my selfish attitude. Like, here's when he helped me, then I think he's great. If he didn't help me, then I wouldn't think he's great, right? It's just selfish, right? But the idea is your mind can change. You can see it in ordinary life, is my point. You can see how your attitude towards one person changes, right? Well, you can do the same thing through meditation. You can change your attitude towards one person, towards 10 people, or towards all people. But it's a matter of just training your mind to view it that way, right? We already do that anyway, but we do it based on self-centered attitude. This Buddhist training, you're trying to train your mind regardless of how they treat you, right, in the moment, but to get a new habit of how you view and experience others. So next time when we meet, we'll meditate on, we'll do this meditation on the, actually I'll warn you in case you don't like it. So we're going to do the meditation on the kind, mother sentient beings. We'll do that one next time. That's what we'll meditate on, so if you don't like that meditation, you don't have to come, but we'll do. It's actually, I'll say one other thing though, like this is real last comment. I said that already, but I just want to say one last thing about Buddhism too in this way. If you want to achieve liberation from samsara, there's only one door, right? It's understanding emptiness and dependent arising as interconnected. And if you want to realize bodhicitta, right, there's only one door. And it's viewing others as kind and precious. Does that make sense? So you can't, in other words, you can't realize liberation from samsara if you don't realize the interconnection of emptiness and dependent arising. But the same way, you can't realize bodhicitta if you don't learn to view others as precious and kind and sort of unbearably precious almost, right? And kind and so on. Yeah, like that. Whereas there's no other way to realize bodhicitta. So if you think I'm going to realize bodhicitta, but I don't think others are that kind, well, you can't realize bodhicitta then. Like, whereas you have to do that. And if you look at both of the methods of developing bodhicitta, the 7-point cause and effect that's grounded in mother beings, or equalizing self and others, they're both grounded in the sense of seeing others as precious, as kind, as, as intimate. That's the other word I was trying to think of. As somebody to be intimate or close with. And so you can't realize great compassion, universal compassion, and bodhicitta without that understanding or appreciation of others. So we have to meditate on that over and over again. And that's hard. I want to say, like, even Pabonka Rinpoche and Rinpa Rinpoche in his commentary, he points out, he said, even he had grown up Tibetan, he was Lama, and he said that Pabonka Rinpoche, who was his guru and great master and wrote Liberation of the Parangan, even Pabonka Rinpoche said, it's not so easy. It takes a lot of training. It took, for Pabonka Rinpoche, it took years of retreat that he realized it. And so the point is, nobody ever said it's supposed to be easy to train your mind or create the right causes and conditions. But it's useful, I think, to use that metaphor. Well, it's the only door to bodhicitta. So if you want to go to bodhicitta, you have to go through that door of appreciation and so on. So let's just dedicate our merit, any good karma we've created, any positivity. Right, then it may lead to, for ourselves and all others, right, the recognition or the realization of the kindness of others, of their preciousness, of intimacy, and so that all beings may realize love, universal compassion, universal responsibility, and bodhicitta. Wherever bodhicitta has arisen, or where it hasn't risen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more, so that the world is filled with people who have a sense of love and compassion. and empathy for each other.